This is a talk about Inception Phases, and specifically about like the problems or the challenges we have when we run Inception Phases. So what I always say is I want to make a case for upfront analysis and design, or rather a bit, some upfront thinking or some lightweight upfront thinking. So this is not about suggesting that we do go back to waterfall and do a big design upfront, hundreds of pages of documentation. But I think we need to, before we start the project, we need to pause and define the basis of what we want to do. So it is really all about solid foundations. And what that basically means is that we need to understand what we're working with, what the context of the project is. The reason is that every project we do is either, at best it's complicated, at worst it's complex. And what we need to do is we need to understand where we are. So this is your is situation, where you want to be, this is your to be situation, and also we want to get an idea of how we get there from A to B. And I think to be successful we need to do this fast and get it right. Now getting it right means we find the important things and we ignore everything else, right? So the purpose of this early thinking is really to de-risk. Find anything that in the future will kind of mess us up. So this might be an opportunity we're not identifying what we could have done better, or it might have been a risk that will later on derail the project, and we're like, oh shit, we should have told you so. That kind of situation, don't want to be in that situation. My kind of mental model of how to approach this is by using modeling, which I would define as something where you take random, unstructured information, or structured information, but information that gets thrown at you. You do something with it, you structure it, you organize it, and you derive some insight from that. And that then helps you to drive the decisions you make around the project. There's a really cool statement from John Locke from I think it's 1500 something, where he wrote about how the human mind works, and he says the human mind has kind of three patterns or modes. In one you take something that's complicated and you identify the parts, then you identify the relationship between the parts, and then you start abstracting or blackboxing things that you're not interested in to kind of take a helicopter view. And I think this is a really good way to think about approaching or thinking about or getting to know complex domains. The parts, the relationships, and then taking a step back. I find it quite amazing that this is from 1500 something, and we're kind of still using the same patterns or the same ideas today. Good modeling for me means it's lean, so you do kind of lazy really. You do the minimum amount to achieve a certain goal. So there is no point in just creating big presentation decks, slide decks, without having actually an actual outcome at the end. So everything we do should be de-risking things, we should be driving towards decisions, we should reduce noise, so ignore everything else that's not needed, and it should be driving us towards a goal. And I'll talk about what these goals can be in a minute when we come to the two examples. So just to set the scene, and you guys know this, more often than not, big design up front is the devil. So there are cases where you want to do a bit more analysis up front, especially when you work in brownfield scenarios or domains. But at the same time, you also know this, if we're too agile and we're thinking agile is random chaos, free for all, that doesn't work either, right? So it's a balance between doing the right thinking at the right point in time, at the right level of detail, and then using that to using lean and agile practices of fast feedback cycles and continuous learning and that stuff to kind of put the beast on a leash basically and manage that complexity we have. I personally think as an industry we suck at actionable modeling, so a lot of business analyst colleagues I see in more traditional organizations, they're basically scribes. They're a bit like the waiter in the restaurant where they're like, oh madam, which requirement would you have? And they're noting this down and then they're giving this to some software engineers. They're like, here, go off and then build something. That's for me not good modeling. Good modeling means you take information, you distill it, you derive insight from it, and then you're supporting your team in building the best solution based on the information you have. You're not a scribe as an analyst, and if you're ever in a situation, I think either you're doing something wrong or the context isn't allowing you to do your job properly. But of course we're getting better, companies like ours and ThoughtWorks and the guys, and we're kind of learning, and good people are doing the right thing. It's really about like focusing on the purpose. Why are you doing the modeling? Why are you doing analysis? It's not to have a massive class diagram somewhere on a wall, it's to get information out of that. So, as I said, do things to the appropriate minimum, and do that just in time, so there's no point in working 6 months in advance, 12 months in advance. When you're done, things have changed. So I think lazy does it, but I'm saying to a lot of people, my lazy is a bit different than your lazy maybe, because for me that might still be more than a lot of other people in the industry are actually doing. And again, it's focusing on the right things. This is what it comes down to, right? What's the risk? Where is the complexity in the project? You focus on that. You look at these things. Everything else is in the inception phases early on, not that important. Right, so a greenfield example and a brownfield example after. So this is for a client who approached us, describing their business as a marketplace where you have parties that own shares, stocks, any financial instrument, and they're sitting on them for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, and at some point they will sell them and they will make money off them. But while they're sitting on these assets, the assets are not making them any money. So there's other parties, so-called counterparties in the marketplace. And they have a deal where the counterpart is like, hey, can I borrow your shares or stocks for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, and then I give them back to you. And in the meantime, these counterparties are doing stuff with the assets. So they might be doing what's called short selling, where you're selling a stock or a share today, you hope that the value drops, then you buy it back, and you make money on the difference. And of course, for the privilege of borrowing the asset, the lender gets some fee of it. It's quite an interesting business model. It can be quite dodgy because, of course, short selling, I mean, we're talking here investments 250 million up. Some of the big players do like billions a day. And of course, if your price doesn't fall, you're a bit fucked because you still have to buy back the assets for much more money. There are reasons why you do this. It's got to do with tax arbitrage. So if you want to avoid paying tax in a certain country, you can. So if you're in the UK, tax on capital gains is really high. You can then lend out your assets to someone in the Netherlands. When you get your capital gains in the Netherlands, they pay less tax on it, and then you give them back, which is morally maybe a bit kind of questionable, but that's one of the business models in here. Our clients were basically supporting that kind of business here. So they're what's called a securities lending agent. It's a bit like an estate agent, really, except that it's not flats but shares. And they had the trading system in place that supported this, a new trading desk, 3 or 4 traders working on it. It's relatively small, and this is quite niche in the industry. And it's nothing new. This has existed since the 60s. However, the incumbent organizations, they're the big players in the market, and they're doing this as a side business. So the information these guys get about the trades that are happening is very basic. Quite often they just get really nasty looking Excel spreadsheets or PDFs as like a statement of their monthly position, and what they're interested in is how much money am I making, how much am I receiving, so how much am I receiving in fees, how much am I paying to these guys as the mediation fee, and what's my risk. So if I'm giving my assets to this party and they go bust, what's my risk of risk exposure there? So they're really interested in data, but the data they're getting by the big players is really bad. So the client approached us and said, we have the trading system, what we want you to build us is a reporting platform on top of that system that tells our clients interesting things. And we want something that, a requirement is to have something that looks, that is polished and is shiny and looks good, but also something that demonstrates transparency, that gives clients not just numbers, but insight. So they wanted a product where clients could quickly look at a dashboard and be like, oh, it's all green, it's all fine, don't have to worry. Or, oh, there is an indicator that's red, I really need to action, I need to request assets back, for instance, if like the borrower was in China and China was kind of on a dive or something. So the challenge here is that the first question really for us to get out of this inception phase, so I should maybe say the client wanted this to be a 3-month project within which we should deliver an MVP, and they really meant MVP, which is great, not all clients understand that, what that really means, as you know. But they also said, can we do a 2-week inception to see whether we should even spend money on those 3 months with you? So our first question was like, can we actually do it? Is this possible? In 3 months, can we deliver something to the clients that is valuable? And can we technically do it? The entire team I was working with, so it was a 5-people team. We didn't know anything about the domain. No one had worked in banking, investment banking before. Not a problem, because we said to the client, if we can work with a product owner, you bring the domain experience, we bring the software delivery experience, and that together is a really great mix. And in this case, the client, so we're working with one of the traders who happened to be a developer in the company, and he was a good guy, so he was not one of those guys who just know enough to be a problem. And he really understood how technology worked, but at the same time he would never get involved in the detail. But he could also communicate really, really well about the domain. And we were sitting with these guys on their trading floor, row of desks, clients on one end, the team on the other end. So we had, like, we could, at any point in time, could walk over to the guys and ask questions, interrupt them during the day. It was an absolute perfect relationship from that respect. The inception phase we ran from the London office, a 2-week inception phase, where we had the clients most of the time in our offices, so taking them out of their day-to-day work. And that worked extremely well as well. So it was the main client, the product owner. There was a guy, his boss on top, who was the sponsor, but he just wanted to be informed whether everything was going fine from time to time. He wasn't that fussed about it. And he wanted to see something shiny. So we tailored communication to that. And then we had a second subject matter expert who was our client's second in command. And the two were basically everyone you had to closely work with. And then there was, of course, ops and compliance and branding and all these other guys which we were just pulling from time to time. The goal, as I said, is sufficient confidence to make a call on can we actually do it. And our approach was on breaking the domain, the complexity down. So what we said was we have a business model at the beginning, like what are they doing? And what we really wanted to do is to get to some kind of roadmap and an implementation or solution strategy based on feasibility assessment and a high-level estimation to then be able to the client. It's like, yes, this is roughly what your MVP will look like, roughly. And of course, this will change over time, but here is an idea. This is how long it will take, and yes, we're confident that we can do it all. Maybe not do it. Got the client in the room, so this is week 1. That's the client. Business model canvas on the wall. So we're basically looking at aspects, like we're trying to understand the business here. So we're not building a business using the business model canvas, but we're reverse engineering a business. So we're looking at who are your clients, who are you working with, what channels are you using to interact with them, what's your product, well, just explained, what resources do you need to provide that service, what activities are you conducting, what's your cost structure, where do you incur cost, how do you make money? Really setting the scene. This is not very technical at all. This is just really like understanding what we're dealing with. For these activities, we had like everyone in the team in the room. Really important that everyone is part of this to start on a really good start with a good understanding of the client. As part of this, we also discussed with them about like what's your vision, what do you want, what's your goals, what are your success factors, and I should have a slide for that. Yes. Try that again. So we did a little bit of an affinity map where we said to the client and the team, which is really important. Quite often this is only focused on the client. We're asking the client, like, what do you think success would look like? We, as a team, agreed that there was also success for us as a E in there. So we looked at, like, what does success for a product look like? And we said, well, the product needs to be transparent, it needs to be secure, it needs to be shiny. It's not a good requirement, I know, but it's a sentiment the client had. And we needed to provide insight. But we also looked at like how would we want to work together. So for software engineers, they said we really want to be heard before. We want to be able to be very transparent with our clients. So if something goes wrong, we want to be able to go to the client and say, you need to take care of this. This is not working well. This is a problem within your organization. Help us with this. So not hiding any problems or issues. So we're kind of building up this affinity map, which then turned into a team charter, and we defined how we would want to work with the client and what was important for us. Having kind of defined like where we wanted to go, what we wanted to do, or how we wanted to work, we also looked at the actual product. So this is now looking at the trades and the transactions that are going on. specifically the products. So they were supporting multiple transaction types, which they call products, and of course they were having multiple clients or users. So here we started for every transaction type. We're starting to draw these little diagrams of how the assets flow, how the money flows, what people are doing. Really at that high level, but that is sufficient. I mean, there was a little bit of text with it, but that is sufficient to illustrate how these things are working at this point in time. You don't need to go into any more detail. We had like 5 or 6 of those diagrams. We then started to look at the different client types. So there might be, in this case, there might be like cash-rich companies like the Apples and the Googles who want to do with assets they hold, something with assets they hold. There might be hedge funds, there might be big banks, etc., etc. We looked at the different types of trades they were doing, and we then identified, well, do you have clients already onboarded that do these type of trades? So that's the colored dots. So the star, this product here with this client type was already trading this as well. And then what's the value? How much money are you making as a business, or what's the importance for you of supporting this? And what we found was that these client types were red herring. They all wanted the same thing. For our application, they were all the same. So we're reducing complexity by not having to worry about that dimension of client types. We're just like, and treat them all the same for now. At the same time, we identified by looking at the value and where they were in the business development stage, that actually out of those 7 or 8 trading types, only those 3 were relevant for the MVP. So again, just ignore it. That's noise. Get rid. Don't think about it anymore. We then did something which was a bit cheeky. We focused our MVP initially on that. We knew the clients really wanted that, especially the senior client, because he had made some commitments around this. But the first roadmap we presented did not include any features of this. They only included this. And we knew that he wouldn't be happy with that, but we kind of wanted to test the waters of how would he react in case he had to make pragmatic decisions. So we're like, well, sir, we can only give you this. And he went a bit like, not happy, white in the face. And they were like, but if we take maybe 1 or 2 features out, we can give you some here. And that showed us that these guys were really good in making proactive decisions. So they were like, okay, if we maybe reduce complexity in some of those features here, and you give us 2 or 3 minor things in these areas, then we're happy with it. So it kind of sets nicely the scene of how you interact and work with the client. It doesn't work always. With these clients, it worked extremely well. As part of this, we also looked into our stakeholders. So we did a matrix around influence versus interest, and the bubbles are just different stakeholders grouped by colored by an area of work. And what you can derive from this is you can understand who you can ignore, who's important for you to support your project, how you will interact and work with different people. And of course, this is something that will over time evolve and grow. We also, of course, having understood the product itself, where the business wanted to go, we then looked at the users of the product. And we identified, so we drew high-level personas. So we identified that there was, so this is our client, internal management, front office, middle office, so these are the guys, the traders doing stuff. And then we had the clients, their clients, there was the classical trader role, and then there was operations support. We identified what they were doing, what needs they had, what they were interested in. And again, we found that if we satisfied that external trader personality, most of the other ones would get like around 80% of the features and functionalities they wanted. So we're like, okay, that's our MVP kind of target group. We then, fortunately, towards the end of the project, had a bit more time, and we found that by just adding a single one feature, which was basically, these guys are looking at their own data only, not at other clients' data, of course. If we just created a mechanism that would aggregate across all accounts upwards, we could satisfy basically everything these guys wanted. So tiny requirement on top was making these guys very happy as well. And these guys, of course, were really important because they're paying for the thing. So that's kind of our 2 main audiences. Next step then, we did a little bit of a requirements hierarchy where this is the product and every bubble is a theme or a really high-level epic. So we spoke to the clients and some of the users, and we identified that, well, what did they want? Well, they wanted a dashboard where they could just see, am I doing well? Am I at risk? Yes or no? Okay, so you've got a dashboard. They were interested to drill down into individual trades they were doing. When was the trade? How much money was involved? So that's kind of, so these ultimately then turned, this just by accident, but turned into screens. And there was one about risk, there was one about the borrowers, and then you have like additional features. So we start to brainstorm what they would expect, what KPIs they wanted to see on the various screens or in the context of the various things. So I'll show you a couple of examples in a second. This was, of course, we had a user experience designer on our team, and she was mainly driving that. And then, of course, we also started in parallel to look at technology. So this is like, what are we dealing with, what technology we want to use, but what's also in place in the business. Keep in mind, this being an investment bank, we're kind of a bit worried about security, compliance, getting code into production. So the guys on the project did this very high-level context diagram where we've got our system up here, some kind of API gateway in between, the trading system that exists, and this is like external where the counterparties and the borrowers kind of interact. And we found that actually the only thing we really had to worry about was the stuff in red. So we are basically not, there is an interface out of the trading system. We're building an API gateway and a website on top. Relatively straightforward. We found then that there were kind of additional external data sources like exchange rates and stuff that we needed to feed into our system as well. But basically that gives you a relatively good idea of how complicated the domain in general is. This is kind of all happening in week 1, early week 2. What you get out of this is you get, by looking at the trades they're supporting, the value, analyzing users, you get needs and expectations, of course, and you get an idea of priorities. Looking at technology and some of the features and things, you get an idea of risks and challenges. So we also, of course, spoke to operations and their sysadmins and stuff, and we identified that there was a big risk, not about, building the thing was easy, but getting code into production. They were talking about like 12 months minimum onboarding time for projects to just be allowed to access production at all. We had to work on their hardware, which was not what we would expect to be good hardware. It took us like 3 days just to get IDEs and develop that environments running. Just getting right. I mean, you've been there. So what we did was, what we said to the client in week 2, we said we want to try to get a kind of hello world scenario into production and just see how hard is that. So we defined a story where we said, as a trader, I want to see a list of currently open trades, so that I can get an overview of my trading position. And that basically would mean just read at least one line item from the trading system, put that on a web page, and you're good. The definition of done would have been so that the key thing is that it's deployed to production. We never made that. I mean, we didn't even make this at the end of the project. I'll come back to this later. Because it's just so hard to follow the process through. But we set this as a key constraint right at the beginning of the project, so that there was no kind of weird what the fuck moment the client had at some point later down. He knew right from the beginning that if he proceeds with us, there is a very big likelihood that we'll never make it into his production environment. In the end, what we then as E did was because we deliver this on a kind of staging environment, and then the client wanted us to stay on board, and we said, look, this will just take 3 months where some admin behind the scenes need to tick some boxes. There's no benefit for you to pay for us. So we're like, look, we'll walk away now, you have what you need. Bring us in as you need support, but don't waste money on us, and we're happy to come back once you're in production. And that's currently still running. It's not satisfying for software engineers, I understand that, because you never really get to see it in production. You might know how identical production is to staging. So I totally understand that is a problem, but in this case, that's the situation we were in. In addition to that, I said we kind of looked at success factors and we defined ways of working. So how would we interact on a day-to-day basis, and what would we use Scrum or Kanban and these kind of things. So that's kind of being defined here as well. So really, what you then need to do is understanding what you want to do, what the risks and challenges are. You want to understand a little bit more about features, because just from requirements you can't estimate really. A requirement can be solved in a number of different ways. So we started to have different. So each paper here is a screen or a view. And each post-it is effectively in this case, a little chart or a little information widget. We then digitized those, and what we showed here were things like, okay, priorities or value to the user, different colors, so the red ones are high priority. We also indicated feature evolution, so things could start very basic, just showing a number, and then over time they could turn, if you had more time maybe, they could have turned into nice graphs and charts and things like that. Just giving the client a little bit of an idea of what they're getting. And of course, these are like high-level wireframes, so they're not designed, ignore the colors on it, it's literally just more about ideas and what this could look like roughly. This went through a number of iterations with user testing, where we showed users, real users, clickable prototypes basically. And were really interesting things in there, and diagrams like this, where we initially thought would be really cool. This was interactive, and you could kind of drag and modify the time frame, and you could drill down interactively. A lot of the users were just not fussed about it. They're like, far too complicated. We just want to see that figure, give us that as a nice chart, no interaction at all. That's good enough for us. So it's quite easy to overthink these things, and that's why it's really important to do user testing, and a little bit like what Neha discussed on Monday, bring product thinking into this. So the final thing is really then to get to like a plan or an estimation or feasibility, a kind of assessment. What we did was we created cards for each of these widgets you've just seen on the wireframe. Up here, this is weeks, this is 12 weeks. We're just like, well, how many of those can we do in week 4? How many of these can we do in week 5? And that was our estimation, feasibility assessment planning session, really. And at the end, we were like, okay, so if this was released, Mr. Client, how does that sound? Does that give you something? Would you be happy with that? We left deliberately the first 3 weeks. We didn't plan to do any real work there because of onboarding and scaffolding and all that kind of stuff. And that was actually really, really good because we were really slow here, and then speed picked massively up towards the end of the project. Actually, to be fair, I think proper storming finished really here, so we should have actually gone after those 3 months. It was a bit of a waste in that respect that the team was then kind of disbanded again. Digitized version, different themes, different features by time, MVP, expected go live date, and then this could have come after, or some of that did actually come after. And of course these things kind of keep changing over time, but it's a good starting point. Yeah, that's the full thing. So, greenfield projects in a nutshell. I think it's important that we keep it high level, and we work breadth over depth. So we don't go into every single detail. We only go into detail where it's really relevant, like for instance exploring the path to production. We try to reduce noise, so getting rid of client types, of user types that are not relevant at this point. We use the right tools and techniques to visualize and analyze information, and we want to know where we want to get to, in this case a roadmap and feasibility analysis. Right. Second example, so this is a retail supply chain tooling. So this is not Brian, that should be brownfield. Okay, think of it this way. You have a company that, think of this as a company that produces cheese or food stuffs. And they have a supply chain where they start taking products in, they catalog them, they kind of forecast demand, how much will I be selling from this. They might kind of plan production, either doing it themselves or having some third party plan production against demand. They will allocate this to stores, they will get it into the stores, distribute it, they will sell it, and then of course at the end they want to reconcile and report on success. So that's a relatively straightforward supply chain. You have a couple of systems they're integrating with. So there's an ERP system, there is a reporting suite, and there's a product management system. Now, these are all third-party, heavy-hitting, the SAPs and the similar kind of like massive systems. In reality, it did look a little bit more like that. In fact, what this was a Visual Basic app, I think 20,000 lines of code, running under someone's desk. And they were pushing 100K of sales through this every year. And it had started as a paper-based kind of thing, and then someone was like, oh, I can automate this in Excel. And he started to build this amazing thing up. And then they let the guy go, and then they realized, oh, there's no one who can support this application. So they brought him back as a contractor. He's now laughing, of course, and now they're really worried that if this guy goes, they're like, what do we do? I can't say who it is, but it is a major UK retailer. So we're not talking about like some shitty little outlet. And it's really surprising how they actually can function with this. It's quite amazing that also it does work. And the guy has done a great job using VB and Visual Basic integrating in Oracle and all. It's just an SAP and which I find amazing. The problem with it is it takes 50 minutes to boot the application locally up on your local desktop, and then it's really unreliable, and users hate it. So they came to Ian and said, we've got a problem here, can you please help us to replace the system with something a bit better? However, we've tried this twice before with major software consultancies, and they both failed miserably. In both cases, it was waterfall, so they're like, let's try something slightly different. So that's the point when we started. This was a 3-month inception phase. 3 months is quite long. I think in this case it was they wanted a working prototype at the end, and they wanted to be really, really, really sure that they could do this. Again, unknown domain, and you do exactly the same steps that was just mentioned before, roughly. Careful with brownfield projects because of confirmation bias, because the clients were like, I don't need all that stuff. Here's the documentation from the previous projects. Just read that and just do what it says in here. And we're like, no, we want to understand how you work, not how your previous application works. Because you're telling us this is a bad application. Why would you replicate that in better technology, right? So careful with confirmation bias. And the challenge in this case is disentangling this spaghetti mess monolithic application and decomposing it into manageable bits. And I want to talk a little bit about how we went about this. We did something which we called slicing, and what it is effectively, it's decomposing an existing domain into isolated parts that are sufficiently decoupled and isolated that you can manage them and think about them and reason about them, but not too small that they become ridiculously simplistic, right? So you want to get good-sized chunks, but at the same time, you want to simplify as much as possible. And we define that good slices were valuable to the business. In some cases, and I'll come back to this later, they might were just valuable for us as well to learn something about technology or risks, but they were valuable to someone on the project. And they should be cohesive and decoupled. This is a bit drawing on microservices kind of and DDD kind of thinking. We said that a good slice would follow the seams in the domain, so it would either be like a process boundary, departmental boundary, or a tech stack boundary. But careful, you've heard of Conway's law, especially in supply chains. It's so easy to replicate a corporate structure in your software, and that can be very, very bad, so you might want to avoid that. We want it to be simple and easy to understand, but not like so simple that at some point it becomes meaningless. I'll show you examples in a second what that means. And really what it is about is like de-risking, again, de-risking delivery. So what we did with them is we asked the clients these questions. We said, why do you think this is complicated? Why do you think this is big? And by just asking a simple question, it's basically the question is like, why can't we build it in an afternoon, right? So and then clients are like, well, it's complicated because this logic is really complicated, or because we've got a mainframe. There are some mainframes in the equation as well. So there are some mainframe systems no one can touch because no one knows how to. So that's, you need to use existing interfaces here. So that just showed us also where some of the challenges, the risks might lie. We were asking like, where's the valuable part? Why is this tool for you so important? And they were like, well, at the moment we're allocating far too much wrong stock to our stores. So people want to buy stuff, but it's not in store, and the stuff we have in stores it's not being sold. If we learn on that, we could just easily make like double our turnover. Maybe it wasn't double, but it was pretty severe percentage. Whereas it's complicated, same thing. Like, yeah, this is demand forecasting logic is really, really complicated. Some Monte Carlo kind of simulations going on in there and stuff. Where's the risk? And they're like, okay, so this is where it went wrong in the previous projects. So both cultural, communication, collaboration related risks. And where's the uncertainty? So in some cases they're like, we have no clue how this thing works because this was done by someone 10 years ago. And so these are really interesting questions to ask. And then you start thinking about your monolithic application. And so think of every block here as a feature or like an area of your application. And you've got your key features. So you've got on one dimension, you have your skeleton, your functional path, the minimum, the MVP basically lives on that line somewhere. And then you've got breadth, which is auxiliary features around. So this might be cataloging, getting a product into the store, whereas this one here might be some additional reporting or things on the side. And then depth, this is where your application becomes more sophisticated, doing something, uploading a file rather than providing a file upload, and then when you evolve, you provide maybe a user interface kind of driven kind of thing where you can, the user can directly manipulate data within the tool. But what you do is when you build this up, you identify maybe the first slice or the first part you will work on here, then maybe you do your skeleton, and then you add other parts based on business value, business priorities, and so on. And I want to talk a bit more about this quickly. So this was our domain model we did with them. This is like, it's much more, and it's like 7 meters long and different. Each kind of posted on here is like a functional area, and we just said to the business, explain to us how this works. Well, have I got? Yes. So we're like, well, we're planning our seasons, we're cataloging, we're forecasting, we're allocating it to stores, we're ordering stuff, and then we're selling, and then we're reporting, and some feedback cycles, and we're iterating on our forecasts, and so on. We're like, okay, then how can we slice this? And we identified kind of these process steps, and there is a little bit of like Conway's law in there, I think, because you can see that they're nicely mapped to different departments. So what we also did is we overlaid roughly the systems architecture, and we're like, well, okay, so do these boundaries actually match with the tech stacks they were using, with the different systems we had to integrate? There's no point in ripping something apart if you then suddenly have like a tiny additional feature that requires you to use a different tech stack in the same kind of part of the functionality. And then what you do is you based on what you learn from that and having discussions with the business, you start optimizing these slices. So you move the boundaries, and for instance, you reduce bad slices. So this one, we're like, that is just cross purposes. That's just because this was another developer building it. So this was just wrong. So we're like, okay, get rid of it. This was something which is too small, not valuable. Okay, move. And this is again kind of cross-cutting. So we're like, okay, let's not talk about these slices first. Split large slices. So we found that we could do an MVP here, but this was just additional nice-to-have functionality. So identify those as additional slices. Identify overarching slices. So reporting reconciliation happened literally at every single step. And these are the tricky ones because, when you build microservices, for instance, then obviously these are the hard ones because you want to kind of be like loosely decoupled, and you have your kind of self-contained microservices, and these have to integrate with everything, and they're a bit nasty. Having identified those slices, we were like, okay, so what's the order, the roadmap for working on these slices? And we did a spider map where we said, well, for the first slice, what's the profile we would like for that first slice? What would it look if it was a good slice? So we're looking at different dimensions here. We're saying, does the first slice need to deliver actually business value in terms of money? Well, no, they said, actually, that's not our main goal. Deliver business user value internally? Yeah, it would be nice if we would improve on some things, maybe. Would the business like to be more agile afterwards? Would they want to learn as part of observing, working with us to become more agile, move towards the past? Yes, that was really important. But also senior management buy-in. Remember I said that they did this twice before, they failed. They really wanted to see right from the outset that we could actually do it. Right? So we needed to find a slice that would be 100% sure that we could deliver it. User buy-in, there was massive change fatigue in the organization. They'd been through this twice, and they were like, oh God, here again, there comes another consultancy, and they're asking us how we work, and then we have to change our ways of working, and so on. And won't work anyway. So we need to get users on board. So that's kind of a slice profile for the first slice. And what you then do is you take the slices you've just seen and you overlay their profile. And you're like, well, slice A, the orange one, is clearly not a good candidate. Whereas, the slice B, that's actually maybe the closest we can get to this. Let's work on that slice. And what we then decided to do is to look at all the slices. And we said, well, the first slice here is tempting because it's at the beginning of the process. There is only outgoing interfaces, so you're not getting anything in. It makes it technically easier. But that was mainly a manual process, and we didn't want to build new functionality. We wanted to replace something first, so we're like, not a good idea. Towards the end, they were really happy with this. They're like, nah, works, don't touch it, it's all good. The ones in the middle, they were the areas of really high complexity, loads of uncertainty, so we're like, that's not a good first slice in the respect to what we were trying to achieve, although sometimes you want to tackle high-risk areas first. But here, it wasn't about risk, it was political risk, so they're like, nah, let's not touch that. What we did was we took the first slice in the actual digital process, just creating a product catalog. Because that was something which we knew we could do. I think it was a single interface coming in, maybe one or two going out. So fairly self-contained, and business users really hated this because of the 15-minute wait every morning. So like, if we can make this fast and reliable, we give business users something, we can prove that we can technically do it, and then we see what comes after. And then we decided as a second slice, we'd implement a steel thread, absolutely minimum, which would never be rolled out to real users for actual use, but where we would integrate into every single key system on the path. So this is basically saying, take a product from here, forecast demand for it, get it into a store, be able to sell it and report back on it. As simple as that. And we would take a product which was a clearly defined product, in this case something like, I don't know, a certain type of cheese, assume. And it didn't have to be any flexible or anything. This was really just to prove that we could deal with most of the complexities in there. And then, of course, afterwards, we kind of build on additional functionality around this. This then allows you also, once you've done that, you can then scale up teams faster because teams can work on different parts of this. Right. So, how do we handle complexity in brownfield projects or inceptions? Well, having understood the domain, we slice it and we break it down. Again, we de-risk based on values and on value, and value is depends on whether it's business value or value in mitigating political risk or optimizing delivery. And again, we reduce noise by focusing on a slice or a subset of slices, not the entire thing. So, summary. Deconstruct, break the domain down. Keep it simple. Use the right visualization modeling tools for analysis or understanding. Breadth first, depth after. Do the minimum, be lean. Do only what's helpful. And then, of course, be flexible. So have a goal. You need to have a vision of how you want to do it, but as you know, no plan survives contact with the enemy, so you have to change while you go and be flexible with that. This is from the amazing Chris Tartelin, who worked with me. I'm not sure whether you guys know him. And he said, yeah, that's all fine and good, but if you're not scared shitless at some point in a project like this, because it's like, wow, how complicated is this? And you're doing it wrong because if you think this is easy, you're missing a point somewhere. But at the same time, of course, if you're constantly scared, then you're maybe doing something wrong either. Right. Thanks, guys.